She told me it was just lunch, a casual catch-up with an old friend from work. Don't overthink it, she said, eyes barely meeting mine as she tossed on her coat and grabbed her bag. It's daytime, a public place. I'll be back before you even notice I'm gone. What she didn't realize was that I'd stopped trusting her words weeks ago, not because of one lie, but because of the slow erosion of detail, the shifting stories, the unanswered messages, the silence that filled the spaces where honesty used to live. Her name was Emma. We'd been together 2 years, long enough to know when something doesn't feel right, long enough to know when someone is there but already slipping away. The lunch was supposed to be at our spot Alder and Vine, a restaurant tucked downtown where we'd had anniversaries, birthdays, arguments that ended in forgiveness over cream brulee. So when she said she was meeting someone there, I didn't get angry. I didn't yell, I just nodded. And then I called Marco. He was one of the head servers at the restaurant, a guy I'd tipped well for years. I simply said, hey, can you do me a favor? If Emma shows up and she's not alone, could you let me know who she's with? There was a pause. Then, you sure you want to know? Yeah, I said. This time I really do. An hour later I got a photo. Sent without words. It was Emma, all right, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize, laughing, twirling her hair, not a casual lunch, not a colleague, and definitely not a woman who planned to come clean about it. But it was the man across from her that got my attention, because 30 seconds after staring at the photo I recognized him too. His name was Jason. I'd seen him twice before, once at a friend's party, once at a work event Emma had begged me not to attend. Both times he'd shaken my hand too loosely, smiled too confidently, and both times he was wearing a ring not on his finger but on a chain around his neck. Engaged, I remembered someone saying. His fiancée's name is Rachel. They've been together forever. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just betrayal. It was double-edged. Two people playing house with hearts they didn't own. I sat with the photo a little longer, let the facts settle, and then I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I wasn't going to shout or throw things or give her the emotional explosion she could use to justify what she was doing. I was going to expose it, not violently, precisely. I found Rachel's profile in under 10 minutes. A few mutual friends. A recent engagement post. Smiles that didn't deserve what was happening behind her back. I stared at her photo longer than I should have. She looked kind, real. The kind of woman who remembered birthdays and brought extra napkins. I sent her a message, short, respectful. Hi, I think there's something you deserve to know. I'm not trying to hurt you, but I won't stay silent either. She replied 4 hours later. Show me. I did. Sent the photo Marco gave me. Then added the date, time, and location. Her typing bubble came and went for a while. Then finally, thank you. Do you know if they're still there? Probably not, I wrote, but we could be. There was a long pause, then she sent the address to her office. Pick me up at 7. Let's ruin their second date. I picked Rachel up at 6:58. She was already waiting outside, arms crossed, her hair tied up like she didn't want anything touching her face. She didn't smile when she got in the car. She didn't speak right away either. But her eyes, focused, sharp. The kind of calm that only comes when someone's hurt so badly they've passed the point of tears and landed somewhere colder. I respected it. She looked over once we hit the highway. You sure they're meeting there again tonight? Marco says she made a reservation. Same time, same table, she nodded. Then let's sit one table over. We didn't need a script. There wasn't a plan full of moving parts. It was just two people done being lied to. We arrived 10 minutes before the reservation. Marco greeted us personally. He didn't ask questions, just showed us to a booth with a perfect view of the one Emma had requested. They're not here yet, he whispered, but I'll seat them in front of you like we discussed. And the dessert? I asked. He nodded, handled. Rachel sat across from me and took a slow breath. This is insane. You can still leave, I said. We don't have to do this. She met my eyes. You didn't start this. Neither did I, but we're the ones who have to end it. I nodded. Then let's end it well. At 7:12 they arrived. Jason was wearing a light gray blazer, casual, smug. Emma wore a green dress I'd never seen before, probably one she kept for occasions she didn't want me knowing about. They were laughing. She touched his arm before they even sat down. My jaw clenched, but I didn't look away. Rachel leaned in. She looks different from her Instagram. So does he. They didn't notice us. Of course they didn't. They were too wrapped in their little fantasy. Too convinced the world revolved around their lie. Marco played his part perfectly, brought menus, poured wine. He even threw in a couple of complimentary appetizers for our anniversary, just loud enough for Emma to hear. Her head turned slightly at the mention, but she didn't see us. Not yet. I watched Jason lean closer to her. His hand brushed hers across the table. Rachel inhaled sharply but stayed silent. We didn't need to confront them. We needed them to see what accountability looked like. Halfway through their entrees, Marco walked by and gave me a subtle nod. "Dessert in 2 minutes," he mouthed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small envelope I'd sealed earlier. Inside was a photo one Marco had also taken just a week ago on another night Emma said she was working late. In the picture, she wasn't with Jason. She was with someone else, Jason's brother. I didn't even know his name, but the image spoke louder than I ever could. Emma kissing him in the parking lot, hands all over each other, caught by the same staff she'd walked past for years without a second thought. Beneath the photo, I'd written a short message on a note card. Just 6 words, "Hope your date was sweet." Marco arrived at their table, smiling like a magician revealing his final trick. "Complimentary dessert courtesy of the gentleman at table 7, he said, setting down the cake and sliding the envelope beside it. Emma's eyes followed his hand, confused. Then she turned, saw me, froze. Jason looked over too, squinting, then blinked when he saw Rachel. His expression shattered into something between dread and disbelief. Emma reached for the envelope slowly like it might burn her. She opened it, pulled out the photo. Her face drained. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked at Jason, then Rachel, then back at me. I didn't move, I didn't blink. I just let her sit in the moment she created. Jason grabbed the photo from her hand, read the note, and shot up from his chair. "You've been seeing my brother," he hissed. Emma stammered. "Jason, it wasn't like that. We were drinking and he saved it," Rachel said, standing too. She walked over to their table and placed her phone down beside their wine glasses. "I want you both to hear something." She hit play. A voice note, Emma's voice, unmistakable, laughing. "I could get away with anything. Jason doesn't ask questions and my boyfriend's basically asleep on his feet. I swear I could date his brother and he'd never notice." Emma's hands flew to her mouth. Jason looked like he'd been punched. Rachel looked at me. "Time to go," I stood up. Emma reached for me as I passed. "Wait, please, I can explain." I stopped, looked her dead in the eye. "You already did, you just weren't supposed to know I heard." And then I turned. Walked out with Rachel beside me, both of us leaving behind the wreckage they caused. Outside, the air felt cleaner. We stood on the sidewalk for a minute, neither of us saying anything, just breathing. Rachel finally broke the silence. "You really had that note printed?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah, and the photo. Same day I got your number." She exhaled. "You're dangerous. Only to people who think they're untouchable." We shared a quiet laugh. Then she looked at me more serious. "What now?" I said. "Now we go get real dessert. Somewhere quiet, and maybe start remembering what it feels like to be around people who tell the truth." She nodded. "Lead the way." We didn't talk much on the way to the cafe. The silence wasn't heavy, it was the kind of silence that comes after a storm. Cleansing, settling. Rachel sat beside me in the car, her arms crossed but relaxed, like she just set something heavy down after carrying it for too long. I glanced at her as we hit the main road, the glow of the passing streetlights softening the sharpness in her expression. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "It's strange, I thought I'd feel more destroyed, but I don't. I feel clear. And really, really hungry for something chocolate." I smiled, thankful for the levity. "Then we're doing this right." We pulled up to a quiet spot on the edge of town, a bakery that stayed open late, known for its ridiculous triple chocolate pie. I'd been there once, months ago, when things with Emma were still stable. Or so I thought. That night I'd ordered a slice for her to go. She said she wasn't hungry. I found the box in the fridge untouched 2 days later. It felt different now. Better. Like this moment actually belonged to someone who would taste what was in front of them. We ordered 2 slices and sat near the back, away from the handful of couples whispering over warm drinks. The lights were soft, the music barely audible, and for the first time since that photo landed in my inbox, I felt like I could breathe again. Rachel picked at her crust first, then looked up. "What were you going to do if I hadn't replied?" I shrugged. "Honestly, probably nothing. I'd seen enough to know she wasn't who she pretended to be, but having you there, that changed everything. You gave it weight, made the lie real for both of them." She leaned back, arms folded again. "I used to think he was the kind of guy who'd never cheat. The kind who called when he was running late, always remembered my mom's birthday, sent flowers when I got promoted. But the truth is, I think he was just good at looking like the right man, not being one." "Yeah," I said. Emma was the same. She performed loyalty like it was a show she could cancel when the audience got bored. We ate slowly, neither of us rushing. Each bite felt like a small reclaiming of control. Somewhere between the last forkful and the final sip of coffee, Rachel said something that stuck. "You know what hurts the most? Not that he cheated. Not even that it was with someone like her. It's that he didn't think I'd matter enough to cover his tracks." I nodded. "Same. Like we were background noise," she continued. "The safe bets. The steady ones. The people they assumed would still be there after the fun was over." I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at her and felt the weight of shared betrayal. "But they were wrong," I said finally, "because this is what walking away looks like. And they're going to remember it longer than they remember whatever thrill they were chasing." Rachel smiled then. Not a sad smile, not a forced one. A real, slow, earned smile. "You're right. And maybe that's the only kind of closure we need." We left the cafe without discussing what came next. No numbers exchanged again. No promises to stay in touch. We were two people who had stumbled into each other's pain and handled it with respect. That was enough for the moment. I dropped her off near her place. She stepped out, turned back once and said, "Thank you. Not just for tonight, but for not letting them get away with rewriting the ending." "Take care of yourself, Rachel," I said. She nodded and disappeared into the night. I drove home slower than usual. Windows cracked. Music low. I replayed the night in my head, the look on Emma's face, the sound of Jason's voice breaking under the weight of his own hypocrisy, the waitress holding back laughter as she served a dessert laced with poetic justice. But more than anything, I thought about the peace I felt after. The satisfaction didn't come from revenge. It came from choosing not to stay small, from standing up and saying you don't get to play with people and walk away untouched. Emma never came home that night. She sent a single message the next day: "I can't believe you did that." I didn't reply. What was there to say? I didn't do anything to her. I just stopped letting her do it to me. 2 days later, she came by the apartment to pick up the last of her things. I let her in without speaking. She moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. But before she left, she stood near the door and said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You just didn't mean not to," I replied. She flinched at that. "I guess you and Rachel are pretty pleased with yourselves." "No," I said. "We're just done pretending we didn't see it. That's all." She left without saying another word. That night I went to the park where I used to wait for her to get off work. I sat on the same bench, same tree overhead. But this time I didn't look at my watch. I looked at the sky, at the way the stars blinked like they were breathing, at the way the wind carried the sounds of laughter from strangers I'd never meet. I felt alone but not lonely. And sometimes that's the biggest win of all. A few days after Emma left, I realized something strange. I wasn't replaying the betrayal in my head anymore. I wasn't imagining the scene in the restaurant or wondering what she was doing now or if Jason had gone crawling back to Rachel. The thoughts would still surface, sure, but they floated, not sank. That was the difference. They didn't weigh me down anymore. They passed through. I went back to work like normal, talked to people without overthinking how I sounded, answered emails, cleaned my apartment, bought groceries. I didn't feel like someone recovering from a breakup. I felt like someone who had been freed from one. That weekend, I saw Marco at the restaurant again. He gave me a quick nod and a quiet smirk as I passed. "You good?" he asked. "I'm better than good," I said. "How's business?" He laughed. "Busier than ever." Apparently word spread about the most dramatic dessert delivery in our history. I shook my head, smiling. "Did they say anything when they left?" The guy, Jason, stormed out. The girl followed. She looked destroyed, but it wasn't the good kind of sad. It was the kind that comes from losing control. They didn't tip, by the way. Of course they didn't, I said. I left a tip that covered their table, just to be poetic. I didn't owe them anything, but I liked the idea of closing that loop with dignity. A few nights later, I was walking home from the gym when my phone buzzed. A message from a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I thought it might be Emma again, or worse, Jason. But when I opened it, I froze. It was Rachel. Hey, I know we didn't really plan to talk again. But I was thinking about that night and, well, everything that came after. If you're free sometime, I'd like to buy you another slice of pie. No revenge this time, just a thank you. I stared at the message for a full minute, not because I was unsure, but because I hadn't expected it. And then I realized I wanted to see her again. Not because we shared pain, but because we shared strength. I replied, tomorrow night, same place. She wrote back immediately, deal. We met at the bakery at 8 p.m. sharp. She was already there waiting at the same table, dressed simply in jeans and a dark blue sweater. No armor this time, just Rachel, real. I sat across from her and we both laughed at the awkwardness of returning to the place where we'd first burned everything down. So she said, picking up her fork, no envelopes tonight. No surprises under the whipped cream, I said. I promise. We talked for hours, not about them, but about us. The people we used to be before the betrayal. The versions of ourselves that once believed love was about endurance, about patience, about being good enough to be chosen over temptation. You ever think we were just easy? She asked. Like they chose us because we were low maintenance. Maybe, I said, but choosing someone because they're easy doesn't mean they're right. It just means you're lazy. She looked out the window. I used to think love was supposed to hurt a little, that maybe I was asking too much to want something soft, something consistent. Turns out I was asking too little. I nodded slowly. That's what they do to you. People like them. They convince you that needing anything is too much. So you stop asking. You stop expecting. And then one day you look up and realize you've been sitting in silence, calling at peace. Rachel looked back at me. You ever want to try again? With love, I asked. Yeah, every day, I said, but only with someone who sees me before I have to prove myself. She smiled at that. And I realized in that moment that maybe the best part of burning bridges is that they light the way forward. We finished our pie and walked out together. The air was cold but not harsh. The streets quiet but not empty. I walked her to her car. Before she got in, she turned and said, this wasn't supposed to turn into anything. I just wanted to thank you. I know, I said, but maybe it already has. Are you saying you want to see me again? I'm saying I already do. She smiled and got into her car, her eyes lingering for a second longer before she closed the door. I stood there as she drove away, watching her tail lights disappear into the dark. The past hadn't disappeared, but it had been repurposed, not for bitterness, but for better beginnings. I went home, sat on the edge of my bed, and opened my notes app. I typed, sometimes the best revenge is simply sitting at the next table with someone who deserves to be seen. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they'll order dessert too. The days that followed weren't marked by grand gestures or sweeping romance. There were no perfect lines of poetry exchanged, no cinematic reunions, just small things, quiet things, like Rachel sending a photo of her morning coffee with a caption that said, not as good as bakery pie, but it'll do. Or me finding myself smiling when I read it, realizing how rare it is to meet someone who not only sees your pain but sits beside it without trying to fix it too quickly. We started texting more. Sometimes about nothing, memes, half-finished thoughts, late-night cravings. Sometimes about everything, why she stayed so long with Jason, why I kept excusing Emma's distance for commitment issues instead of emotional cruelty. We weren't just unpacking what happened. We were learning who we were without the lies we used to hold up like scaffolding. One night, about a week after our second bakery meetup, Rachel asked if I wanted to go for a walk. No dinner, no formal plans, just a walk. I said yes. We met by the river, the trail lit by old iron lamps and the occasional flicker from passing boats. She wore a hoodie and jeans. I'd never seen her look more comfortable. She handed me a cup of hot cider and asked, you ever think they really believe they wouldn't get caught? I think they were counting on us being too tired to call them out, I said. That's worse. Much worse, she agreed. We walked for nearly 2 hours, talked about how love becomes background noise when you stop asking questions, about how trust doesn't die in explosions, it fades in small silences. She told me about the time she made Jason a scrapbook for their anniversary and he laughed, said it was cute, and tossed it on a shelf. Never looked through it. I told her about how Emma used to go out with her friends, come home hours late, and act offended if I asked who she was with. You're controlling, she'd say. I need space. I thought needing space meant honesty came with it, I told Rachel. Turns out sometimes it just means they want less accountability and more permission, she added. There was no bitterness in our voices anymore, only clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop blaming yourself for someone else's broken compass. As we looped back to the parking lot, she paused near her car. You know, it still surprises me, she said. What does? That you didn't explode. You didn't scream at her or at him. You just let it all fall apart and stood still. Anger's loud, I said, but truth whispers and still cuts deeper. She looked at me like she was trying to memorize the line. That's why it worked, I added, because they didn't see it coming, because we didn't flinch. She leaned against her door and said, You've changed the way I think about endings. In a good way, in the only way that matters, with dignity. That night I sat in my apartment, lights low, staring at the ceiling. I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel like I'd lost anything. What had ended wasn't real, not for a long time. What had begun, quietly and carefully, was the start of something honest. It was like learning how to breathe in a room that used to suffocate you. The next weekend, Rachel and I tried something new. An open mic night. She'd never been to one before. I'd only gone once, dragged by a friend. We didn't go to perform, just to listen. But something about the energy in that space, the stories, the poetry, the rawness of it all, felt like the right kind of messy. About halfway through, someone read a piece about betrayal, about sitting across from someone who said all the right things and still made you feel invisible. Rachel reached for my hand, just for a second, but it was enough. After the event, she walked me to my car and said, You think we'll ever trust someone the same way again? I thought about it. I don't want to trust the same way, I said. I want to trust better, smarter, with someone who earns it every day, not just on the first one. That's heavy, she said. You want lighter? No, she smiled. I want real. Later that night, I got a message from a mutual friend. One of those people who still followed both Emma and me, still quietly monitored the aftermath. Did you hear? It said. Jason's moved out. Emma's been posting cryptic stuff about realizing your worth too late. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That story was no longer mine to carry. And honestly, it never really was. Rachel and I kept seeing each other. No labels, no pressure. Just two people who had been burned standing close enough to the fire again to see if maybe, just maybe, it could be warmth this time instead of destruction. One night, while making dinner together, she looked at me and asked, If you could go back to the beginning, would you still walk into that restaurant? I put the pan down and thought about it. Absolutely, I said, even knowing what it cost, especially because of what it gave me after. We never called it a relationship. Not at first. Not even after weeks of long walks, late-night calls, quiet dinners, and soft glances across coffee cups that felt louder than the things we used to say in our old lives. There was no pressure between us to define what we were. Maybe because we had both been defined by someone else for too long. Rachel and I knew that healing wasn't always about rushing into something new. It was about learning what it meant to be safe in someone's silence again. No tests, no games, just showing up again and again without needing applause for it. The night that changed things started like any other. We were sitting on my balcony, a couple of fleece blankets between us and the October chill, a record playing softly from inside. She had just finished telling me about a trip she took years ago, one where she got lost in a city she'd never planned to visit, and how it taught her that being lost wasn't always a bad thing. I remember the way her eyes moved when she talked, like they were painting as she spoke. And when she finally went quiet, just sitting there with the skyline reflecting in her gaze, I said it without thinking. I don't think I would have made it through this if I hadn't met you. She turned toward me, not startled but careful. You mean that? I mean it in every way someone can mean something. She didn't speak for a while, just looked out again at the buildings, at the blinking lights that always made the city feel like it was breathing. I've been waiting to feel like I wasn't a lesson for someone else's mistakes, she said finally. And then I met you. And suddenly I wasn't a lesson. I was a choice. That was the first night she stayed over. Not because we needed to prove anything, but because the idea of saying goodbye again felt like trying to unfeel gravity. She fell asleep with her head on my chest, her fingers curled in my shirt, breathing steady, like even her body trusted me now. And I lay there for hours, not moving, not sleeping, just existing in the most complete way I ever had. The next morning we made pancakes, bad ones, burnt edges and uneven syrup and laughter that tasted better than any breakfast I'd had in years. She danced to the song playing from my phone, barefoot, hair messy, eyes brighter than any woman who's ever walked away from betrayal with that much grace had any right to shine. But she did, and she was mine now, not because I deserved her, but because I didn't pretend to. A week later, Emma reached out again. Not with anger this time, just a single line: "I missed the way you looked at me." I stared at the message for a while before deleting it. No response. No need. That chapter wasn't even in the same book anymore. It belonged to a man who let silence swallow his instincts. A man who accepted crumbs and called it a meal. That man was gone, and I didn't mourn him. I was proud to leave him behind. Jason reached out too, if you can believe it. Through some mutual acquaintance, I found out he'd been trying to piece things back together with Rachel, trying to rewrite his story with excuses instead of apologies. One night he actually showed up outside the cafe we'd met at, the same one where we'd served him dessert with a side of humiliation. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets, looking like a boy caught between stories. I didn't approach him. Rachel did. She walked right up, asked what he wanted. He said he just needed closure, that he didn't understand how everything had fallen apart so fast. Rachel didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just said, "You didn't fall apart fast. You were crumbling the whole time. I just finally stopped trying to hold you together." And with that, she turned and walked back inside. We didn't talk about it afterward. We didn't need to. That moment belonged to the version of her that had once stayed quiet for too long. And now that she'd found her voice, she didn't owe anyone an explanation for using it. Eventually, we did put a name to what we were, not for anyone else, just for us. We were something whole, something earned, something that grew from truth, not from fear. I remember the first time she called me her boyfriend. It was casual, offhand, said in front of a friend of hers while we were picking up food. But later that night she looked at me and said it felt good to say that. And it did. Because for the first time in a long time, the title matched the experience. Months passed. We built routines, lazy Sunday mornings, grocery lists we never followed, a shared Spotify playlist where she added old love songs and I added instrumental piano tracks to balance her drama. One day she caught me printing the photo Marco had taken, the one of Jason and Emma at the table. I was about to throw it away, but I paused. "You keeping that?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I want to remember that I was strong enough to sit at the table and not lose my voice." She came over and took it from me, tore it in half. Then again, until it was nothing but soft white edges in her hand. "Now you can remember it without looking at it," she said. That night I opened my journal. Yes, I still kept one, and wrote something I hadn't been able to put into words until then. She went on a date with another man, so I sat at the next table with truth, with proof, with strength, and with the only person in the room who knew how to stay. If this story reminded you that sometimes the best response is stillness, and sometimes justice is quiet but unforgettable, subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Real love doesn't require surveillance. It requires clarity, honesty, and a damn good dessert.